Viral pandemic takes over year 2020. Everyone hardest hit, but especially the recreation economy. Well, now that you are likely struggling with work, school, and all the rest of it, how is your recreation going, especially your reading? Are you able to even get into books now that you're worried maybe about whether or not your kids are going back to school? And how can an outreach like ours, devoted to finding the best Christian fantasy, fare in these uncertain times, TM? This is Fantastical Truth, the podcast from Lorehaven, and in said podcast, we find the best of Christian fantasy and we apply the truth, the goodness, the awesomeness in these stories to the real world that our Creator, Jesus Christ, calls us to serve. I am Stephen, and I publish Lorehaven. I'm also the co-author of the new nonfiction resource, The Pop Culture Parent, along with Ted Turneau and Jared Moore.
And I'm Zackary Russell, otherwise known as Zach, otherwise known as the producer of this podcast. And this is episode 34. How has Lorehaven been questing through the great 2020 pandemic?
Yes, indeed. We shall, for now anyway, step back from some of our bigger topics and book explorations. We thought about tackling another big topic today. For example, there was a nasty debacle involving Netflix recently. That's a bit intense, and we were going to explore, well, what do you think about boycotts? Should we burn our Harry Potter books if you think they've got witchcraft in them or something worse? What about the whole thing with the Mulan movie and China? There's all kinds of those issues that we could explore, and perhaps we will in a future episode. Also, in a future episode, we might go back to that aliens topic. Audiences love aliens, and we can debate whether or not that particular headline meant there really could be life in the atmosphere of Venus. Which of those topics, by the way, would spark your interest? That's what I want to know, because we have a pile of themes we want to explore, and sometimes it's just difficult to determine which one comes next, especially if some trendy headline comes along and seems to rise to the top. So we'd love to hear from you. Which of those topics would interest you the most? You can, of course, email podcast@lorehaven.com or comment on the website or any of our various social media. For now, though, we're going to actually talk just a bit about Lorehaven itself, what we at the Lorehaven.com star system have been doing to deal with the pandemic, and how we've been finding time to read books and keep going as best we can, even given the fact that we can't get out to events and publish magazines as often as we would like to.
But first, we are introducing a new segment today. It's called Stranger Than Fantastical Fiction. So this is where we're going to pull something from the news. It might be something you've heard about. It might be something a little more obscure. It is absolutely true, but absolutely weird and fantastical. And so for today's story, there was a video, Stephen, the other day that I thought was a total fake, and so many other people did too. And so I found the original source for this. This was Defense Secretary Mark Esper speaking at the Air, Space, and Cyber Conference on September 16th, so just a few days ago as we record this.
Meanwhile, in space, Moscow and Beijing have turned a once peaceful arena into a warfighting domain. They have weaponized space through killer satellites, directed energy weapons, and more in an effort to exploit our systems and chip away at our military advantage.
And John Greenwald Jr. from the Black Vault found the original source, so credit to him. So Mark Esper in this talk says, quote, "They have weaponized space through killer satellites, directed energy weapons, and more," end quote. So, holy cow, you guys thought that Space Force was a joke. Now we find out there are killer satellites and there are directed energy weapons above our heads floating around in orbit. So we are definitely getting the laser space war this year, perhaps. But what in the heck are killer satellites? Like, what is happening right now?
Ho, ho, ho. What a comforting thing to know. Zach, when you said, meanwhile in space, listeners, can't you just close your eyes, use your imaginations, and see the little yellow box with the slanty edge at the top left corner of this panel right now? Meanwhile, in space, ... And then you see the guy, at the platform, the energy or the defense secretary talking about directed energy weapons and dadgum space lasers. Why not? Year 2020, everyone. Why don't we just give it all a hand?
Now, once you look into all this, it gets probably a little more boring. This is just satellite to satellite warfare, whatever.
Yeah, it's probably just some invisible infrared signal where they're sending a data stream or something. But no, it's a bond weapon. Like, it's one of those things that the
Yes.
Justice League has that they could accidentally unleash on the town. It's
Yeah, well, there was a movie, back in the early 2000s or something. It was called Space Cowboys with Tommy Lee Jones, and it was all about this defunct Russian satellite that poses this huge risk. And is it okay to give spoilers? Well, you don't want spoilers, just hit the 30-second fast forward button right now. But what it turns out is this defunct satellite had nuclear missiles in it, and it was going to malfunction and shoot all these missiles at the Earth or something. And so all these old guys had to go up there because the satellite had this really old technology that all the new astronauts didn't know how to deal with, I guess punch cards or something. This idea has been around for a while of like, what happens when space becomes a war fighting domain? And, presumably you're thinking, oh, it's just satellite warfare. But man, think about how much our lives now depend on satellites. Now we got Elon Musk sending up these Starlink satellites that are apparently ruining astronomy. And, everything, from your directions on your phone to your television signal to, just communicating around the world, everything is increasingly becoming space-based. But Stephen, there are even some wilder theories about this, and that the wildfires in California are being started by these directed energy weapons in orbit.
Do we even want to give that credit by repeating it here? As we all know, it was gender reveal parties. Haven't you kept up with the memes? It was gender reveal parties and possibly some arsonists and just some jerks running around, and also some political issues. And if you think we're getting into those about the state of California, no.
Yeah. You can listen to a Daily Wire or something else about deforestation policies or whatever. But
that's not happening here.
The point is people are running wild with this 2-sentence snippet from this this cyber conference. Everyone is like, bring on the space war or whatever. So that has been your Stranger Than Fantastical Fiction update.
Yeah, let's have fun with these sorts of things, but of course, keep it in perspective. Make sure we don't actually buy into fake news. If they put out some qualification or something, just you catch up with it. I don't think we'll be obligated to have to come back to it here and make it boring. Anywho, Zach, let's talk about Lorehaven now. Lorehaven is still going strong. Lorehaven.com is intending to be, if not already is, your exclusive source for finding the best of Christian fantasy. Lately, if you're newer to Fantastical Truth, of course, this podcast is part of Lorehaven. We do reviews, we do articles. We have the original Speculative Faith blog, which originated in 2006, I believe. And of course, as of this year, we have Fantastical Truth, which is part of the Lorehaven network, probably the newest part. Until a few months ago, we also had an actual magazine we put out every quarter. By actual magazine, I mean a print product. We didn't mail it to people's houses, because that gets a bit expensive, especially for a new magazine for an admittedly niche market. I mean, Christian-made fantasy, y'all. It's not streaming television or sliced bread or something that's admittedly more popular, but still very, very welcome by people who know that these kinds of stories not only exist, but can be amazing. This year, we did adjust, though. We have more articles online. We've been posting from our backlog of reviews of these amazing novels, I think every day through this summer. And I think, just a couple days from now, by the time you listen to this, we will technically be into the fall equinox. So those reviews will still be going, and basically daily. If you follow us on social media, you can see those, or you can go to lorehaven.com/reviews. These come from those magazines that we were putting out every quarter, going back to 2018. Zach, have you seen any of those reviews? I'm just curious if you, like me, have been able to use those from our amazing volunteer review team to find any new, uniquely Christian-made fantasy, sci-fi, other fantastical genre novels.
Oh, yeah. I love checking in with the Lorehaven Library because my kids are blowing through books like crazy. We've definitely loosened up like screen time rules during the pandemic. Okay, like we're not And we're not kidding ourselves. We actually saw this hilarious thing the other day that said, you can choose screen time or screaming time. That's your choice. So we choose some screen time. Like, we're not totally locked down, but we are trying to keep things balanced, and our kids just love books. And
You can always have a book on the screen. That's the beautiful
There you
part
go.
about it. It doesn't need to be a choice between a screen. Screen doesn't mean TV show or game. It can also mean book, even a picture
Oh,
book.
yeah.
The only thing you can't get on a e-reader would be only be able to get from a physical copy would be a pop-up book. And I imagine even someone is working on those. Your holographic e-reader is on the way.
Oh yeah, that's what I was promised, right? But yeah, we don't consider Kindle reading, screen time. It's just book time. So anyway, we dive into the reviews all the time to find a good book for our kids that would match their interests and kind of their maturity level. So it's been an awesome resource for us.
Well, what about you yourself? I will say that for me, at least until recently, and by recently, I mean just within the past few weeks in September of 2020, I, despite being the distinguished publisher of Lorehaven Magazine, have been doing very little reading. I've mostly had to do, Lorehaven stuff as well as just moving stuff. Because as you know, Zach, and now as you know, listeners, my wife and I, and now the two teenagers from the kind of a foster type situation who are moved in with us, we actually bought a house and we moved just a few streets away. So we get more space, including more office space. I'm working on trying to get in some bookshelves, but just by virtue of being able to think about that rather than being in a corner in my bedroom at the old place, I think, I really do need to clear more time for reading. And yes, I can find the time if I really try. So I finished this amazing book of C.S. Lewis essays and short stories just a few days ago. I'm going back and rereading some old favorites, and then I'm going on a binge, going to go into the Lorehaven reviews and find the kinds of books that we review that I think I would love. As you know, we try to review just the best books that our review team members can find, and we try to match those with the best type of readers who we think would enjoy these books most. If we don't like a book, we try not to review it. We would rather not be mean to a book that we don't like and realize that someone out there is going to like it if it's a real book that's been published, that is in a fantasy genre, and that happens to be written by a professing Christian author.
Yeah, I'll be honest, Stephen. My reading time it's getting better. I'll just put it that way.
Well, it's like I said earlier, the recreation economy has been hardest hit. And if we're trying to survive with the kids in the house and not going to the school or the daycare or any of those adjustments we have to make, kind of crowd into the leisure time, which makes sense.
Yeah, I've been trying this new discipline of just whenever I have books all throughout the house. Okay, I have probably 8 or 10 books I'm in the middle of. Just listener, just so you know, I am the distracted boyfriend, like in flesh. Okay, like I start a ton of books. I start way too many books before I finish other ones, and then I read very slowly. And so I've always got a book, and in every room in the house I've got a book that I'm in the middle of. But I've been trying this new exercise that when I walk into a new room, if I'm like in transition between different things throughout my day, I try to just sit down for a few minutes, and my goal is like just 15 minutes. Just pick up a book and just start reading it. And it really helps me just calm down. There's so much going on in the news. It's just honestly making me really anxious. And, reading a book just helps kind of escape some of that. And in fact, at night, the other discipline I'm trying to do is stashing my iPhone, my iPad in the room with my computer, turning everything off or putting everything on chargers, and then retreating to the living room or my bedroom with a book or Kindle or whatever, but not the internet.
Yes.
We're all living our lives entirely online right now. It's no longer recreation. I'll just say that. Like social media, the news, YouTube, even, it's no longer relaxing. It's just, it amps you up so much more than even before it did. I hear a lot of people talking about this movie, Social Dilemma, which apparently is about how all these algorithms are being gamed against us and just driving us mad. And
is that on the streaming service that must not be named?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, which I'll watch it and get back to you about it, since I know that's not a possibility for you now. But anyway, it's I've been getting back into books more because I've desperately needed to get away from the World Wide Web.
It does cultivate the soul. All those little myths about how the buzz of the Twitters or this scrolling, like those do slowly rewire the brain. And if you pay attention, at least in my case, if I pay attention, I can feel my brain taking those little shortcuts. I'm sure a brain scientist would come up with some more scientific ways to describe that, but I can feel the connections being strengthened when I'm sitting down and reading a book, whether it's on a device or a physical copy. But for me, there really is, I don't know if it's just my age or the way I was raised or whatever, there really is nothing like a physical copy. There's a texture, there's something incarnational about it to actually have the words on a physical page. And I especially love physical copies when it comes to fiction. I can read nonfiction all the time much more effectively on an electronic device, particularly if it's something with a lot of references, then you can just click and jump to the end note. I love it that
Highlight
way.
Things.
Yeah, I have not even seen the pop culture parent in the that's my book. I haven't even seen that in the digital version yet. I probably ought to just spring for it. They gave me plenty of print copies, but I need to see if I can get the electronic version from Amazon and see what that looks like, especially with our endnotes. I think that'd be great, particularly with a dedicated device. I can't read stuff on my phone. It's got to be a tablet or a Kindle or something like that. Even you mentioned, Zach, and we need to move on here, I know, but you mentioned the value of the physical space. That's one of the blessings of the new house to which we've moved is my wife's in my bedroom is a little bit bigger, and there's actually kind of like a living area in there, and everyone has a different living situation. And if you're in an apartment or living with family or something, then you may not necessarily have that. But we've just decided to make that, kind of a private recreation space. And we have a recliner I moved in there, and I would just love just to be able to go, okay, this is the space for reading books, like almost get legalistic about it. And I'm being facetious there, but what if I just decided this is the no phone chair? Just read books in this chair. Like, it's going to happen more readily than it would if we just decided to be so liberty minded about it that we're actually not practicing. You said the word discipline earlier, Zach,
Right.
and that's what it takes. Discipline, of course, the root word of discipleship. So it's just training. And that's part of the Lorehaven mission too, is just hoping to train people to not only find the best stories, but to think about them in a biblical way. And the articles from the magazine do that. But of course, we've been doing that for a lot longer before the Lorehaven name ever came along at the blog that was still known as Speculative Faith. It's now speculativefaith.lorehaven.com. So it's a planetoid circling around the Lorehaven name and platform is kind of the star at the center of it. And Zach, you've mentioned that is how you found us. And I'm trying to remember, I think you've mentioned this before, even on the podcast, like how you found Speculative Faith, how we got together, discovered we were living in the same area. What was the article that you looked for, or how was it you found us?
Yeah, so I believe it was during one of the SpaceX launches. It may have been the one where he sent up the car. And, they said, we're going to send this car and we're going to put people on Mars and we've got all these plans. And so I just started Googling questions about this. Like, I wonder what other Christians think about a Mars colony or just space exploration, or, the exoplanets have been in the news a lot because of the Kepler Space Telescope and finding all these supposed Earth twins. And so I Googled something about all that, and I ran across an article you'd written, Stephen, that said, will Christians colonize the cosmos?
Oh, that's a great headline. I wish. I guess I came up with that, but yeah, I'm trying to get better at those kind of soft clickbait headlines. So I'm really glad that one worked.
Oh man, I ate it up, and one of the things was this verse, and I've seen some discussion about like Isaiah 45, which says the Lord has made the earth to be inhabited. And so there's kind of this idea of, well, he didn't make Mars to be inhabited. And so,
right.
Yeah. So you go into that, and, there's a lot of history with that verse. People thought we'd never go to the moon. And so now we have, and then now we have people living in orbit. And so it's this, I think the question I had was, is Jesus going to come back before people go to Mars?
Because that is so a future podcast discussion.
Yeah,
because there's that breaks the plot. That breaks the plot. Right. If Jesus comes back to Earth and there's people out there on Mars who aren't. I mean, the whole imagery of the second coming is exclusively Earth focused, and you've already got an issue with people living on the other side of the world. If Jesus comes back first to Jerusalem or the Mount of Olives or any of those places, And of course, the Old Testament's constantly using imagery of God touching down on this mountain or that mountain. And in the 12th volume of the Left Behind series, and it ends up a bit of a mess because they're trying to synchronize all these prophecies, and Jesus is going here and touching down, and then he's going there and touching, and he's just bouncing all over the place. So how much more complicated does it get if people are off trying to colonize Mars? So anyway, future episode. Sorry, I cut in there.
Yeah, no. Well, that's a perfect mention there, Left Behind, because after that article about will Christians colonize the cosmos, I guess I clicked on your author name or something, and I found you'd written an article that said Left Behind is still kind of cool. And I thought, man, okay, this is what I'm here for, because I loved Left Behind when I was in college, a college student. The Kirk Cameron movie came out, and I started reading all of the ebooks before there were Kindles. It was this Palm Pilot I had.
He was an early adopter. That's right.
Yeah. And so I read through the whole series, and and I kind of gradually became less interested by the end. I'm like, okay, this is, I still like this, but there's some things I don't like about it. I won't go into all that now, but the point is, I had read so many Christian hot takes about why this was a bad book series, and I'm like, no, I don't really buy that either. There's something really good about it, and your article explored that, about the things you still really loved about it, even though it's just you've kind of moved beyond it now. And it's funny that we're talking about this now, because my oldest daughter is reading the Left Behind for Teens or Left Behind for Kids or whatever series that they it was like 43 or so novels that are
48
novelettes.
Yes, they made 4 of them per adult book, so 48 times 12 or 4 times 12 is 48. My sister had those. If she wants to borrow the dramatic audio edition, which condenses things still further, just let me know. I have all 6 of those collections.
Well, and now they've Tyndale's repackaged those, so there's like 3 or 4 of those per 400 or so page book.
Okay.
And now it's condensed down to like 12. But anyway, I love this spirit of spec faith that I saw in that article that you wrote about this series, which was, okay, we're going to discern the things that we didn't quite agree with or didn't quite like, but at the same time, we're going to celebrate the awesome in this series. And I thought, that's it. This is the community I want to be a part of, because I do want to celebrate awesome Christian fiction. I don't want to just nitpick things. Like I don't really care for nitpicking and just being a critic that just tears everything down. I want to be a geek a little bit. I want to be excited about these books, even if they're not perfect, because who else is writing this kind of stuff? Like, I don't care if it's not a 10 out of 10 every time. I want to read these kind of books. And so I thought, this is it. This is the group I want to be a part of. And so, hey, listener, if you are feeling some of this too, if you want to geek out with us, this is the place for you. As Stephen mentioned, this is not a huge community. You're part of an exclusive community, and you get to be that sort of ambassador to your friends and family members and community that say, hey, I know a place to go that has so many books written from a Christian perspective about fantastical stories. You get to be the expert. You get to be the resource to people. And so, hey, you're in the right place if you're hearing all this.
Well, not only that, but it's not just my articles. Like I was kind of crowing over my headline earlier and realizing, hey, it's been a few years since I wrote that. So I can look back on that and think about it as if someone else wrote it and think, hey, that's really cool. Right now, for example, on Speculative Faith, Travis Perry, I don't know how he finds the time, but he is writing this mega series exploring racism from the perspective of a Christian fantastical fan. Travis does a lot of great work, and I urge you to go look at that series. It's pretty hard hitting, especially right now, and it's something that just represents one of those in-depth topics that we're trying to explore from that intersection of biblical faith and fantastical imagination. So sounds like I'm shilling, but Spec Faith actually precedes me. Several authors started it in the mid 2000s before I ever even caught up to the thing. And then I just volunteered myself onto it back in the day after I met some of these writers at a writers conference. Zach, I'm so glad you found us, because without you, we wouldn't have this podcast, which are now closing in on 40 episodes now. I think we're going to make it to the end of the year. I think we're going to have 50 episodes by Christmas, which is wonderful. And as we mentioned earlier, we have so many ideas for those future discussions to explore. And I think just in this last segment, we've come up with a few more. Why the Left Behind series is actually still kind of awesome, for example. I mean, that needs to be, I think, a future episode based on those articles, because some of that's evergreen content. I'll be sure to include some of these links, by the way, into the show notes. Without focusing too much on Lorehaven, of course, at least for me personally, now that we're doing podcasts and not just articles and stuff, I'm still doing live streams with Realm Makers. They've been doing more live streams this year using a platform called Crowdcast, and we'll include their link in the show notes as well. Zach, you've actually joined me for one or two of those. I would really love to do that again sometime. Not sure if it'll be the next one, which is, Thursday, September 24 is when we're going to have that. So if you're listening to this podcast on release day, Tuesday, September 22nd, just a couple days away at 8 p.m. Eastern, I'm going to be talking about how can fantastical stories boost your Bible reading. So we've been talking about making time for reading fantasy, finding the most amazing books that you can find. Don't, of course, neglect God's most epic, fantastical narrative, which also happens to be true, the scriptures. And how can your being a fan of this genre actually help enhance your experience of exploring God's gospel narrative? Lord willing, next live stream, I'll have a better film set. Right now, you'll probably see a blank wall, maybe some boxes. But like I said, I'm still trying to get those bookshelves in. Thanks to the pandemic, Europe has been having a hard time making them. And then, Zach, off air earlier, you were mentioning an interaction you had with Steve Raza, who's a sci-fi and other multi-genre novelist in his own right. And we're also blessed to have him running the Lorehaven Book Clubs group on Facebook. I've been hopping in and out of there, mostly just watching it, because Steve does such a great job overseeing the invitations for authors whose books we've reviewed. And they come in there to interact with fans, occasionally do some giveaways, share some behind the scenes and stuff. We'll include that link in the show notes too. It's just another way we try to interact with people long range and encourage that culture of reading the best books, even if we can't get together at events in person.
Well, and another fun thing we've added is the Lorehaven Store. So we've gotten a lot of really cool T-shirts and other sort of gifts designed. And hey, maybe that's a good Christmas gift you can get for someone that's not too far away.
Only 3 shopping months left, actually.
Yeah, and everything is just through Amazon right now, just to make it simple. We have the shirt that I've worn a lot, I wear all the time, that says he made the stars also, which is I just love that line from Genesis. It's like one of the most it's one of the most subtle things. It's like, oh, by the way, God made the stars, the billions of galaxies with billions of stars. Yeah, he made this, yeah, by the way.
Footnote.
And yeah. And we've gotten a lot of great feedback on that shirt and some other shirts, like the book was better, which is, hey, once we can all go to the movies again, that's a great shirt you can wear to a movie. Steven, a big movie that's coming up that everyone is talking about right now is Dune.
I knew you were going to say that. Did anyone else know he was going to say that? I'm ashamed to admit I've not read the Dune book. I
haven't either.
Oh, thank God.
Yeah.
I was afraid it was going to be another one of the, oh, Steven, you haven't read Dune. Yes, and I also haven't seen Battlestar Galactica, and the first time I saw the original Star Wars trilogy was 2008, so sue me. I have on the T-shirt, the Lorehaven T-shirt, He's Not Safe, But He's Good. It's got an amazing lion silhouette there, of course, classic Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe reference. My other favorite is the quote from Francis Schaeffer. It's just very bold letters across the front. It says, quote, "The Christian is the one whose imagination should fly beyond the stars," end quote. Verified Francis Schaeffer quote. This isn't one of those fake ones you see on the internet, along with fake C.S. Lewis, fake Abraham Lincoln, and any of those other fakers. Amazing designs. And I can say that without self-aggrandizing, because I didn't make them. Our magazine cover designer, JT Wynn, he made those for Christmas last year. So, of course, great Christmas gift items for yourself or for any of the other Christian fans on your nice list. Lorehaven.com/store. I really do sound like a shill here, but I've had my coffee and I'm enthusiastic about all these things. And now that I'm done with the move, I can kind of remember myself, hey, all this stuff is still out there, even if we can't do events. Yeah. And otherwise I would just sit around and not read and complain about not being able to go to events and meet people and sign books and things. Yeah, 3 shopping months left. We can still have Christmas this year, right? The meteor's not going to hit us, and we're not all going to die in an election cataclysm, are we? We're still going to
I
have
hope-
Christmas. It's not always election, never Christmas. That would be just silly.
Yeah, well, tell us about, Stephen, the print copies of Lorehaven, the magazine. What's going on right now with those?
Well, there aren't any physical print copies right now. I'll just be blunt about that. If people say Lorehaven Magazine, obviously the first thought is, oh, this is something I can get in the mail. Classic. Like my grandparents got Life magazine in the mail, and used to get Reader's Digest in the mail, or Time magazine in the mail. Like maybe they still send stuff in the mail, and that's great. But right now, Lorehaven can't print issues because there's no events at which to distribute them. We've basically gone, for now anyway, into just being a webzine. You get the magazine, you still get all the same great content at the lorehaven.com, but because we can't go to places and actually sell the copies of the magazine, those are not yet available. You can blame the pandemic, of course. Without that incentive, it's a little bit more difficult to put all of that content together into a print form, because we're not just telling people, oh, put our magazine together for free and we'll pay you with exposure. That's ghastly. I don't even think that that's biblical. And I try to be very upfront with anyone who wants to work with us. Is like, we obviously can't pay you what a major magazine publisher would be able to pay, but we're not going to pay you in exposure. A little behind the scenes info there. So the actual
What is your phrase? People die of exposure?
Yeah. Well, it's not mine, but yeah, exactly. No, that actually, I say it's unbiblical, and that's because Scripture says, "Do not muzzle the ox while it is treading out the grain," which is a very Bible way to say you pay people what their labor is worth. You do not deny them what they are owed. So anyway, the actual result of that means that our last issue, the summer 2020 issue, is online only. And it looks like our fall 2020 issue, already in progress, will also be online only. Not sure about the winter issue or going into 2021. We will have to figure that out. But either way, even if we do print issues, it's not like we mail them to your house. We don't have the retro kind of magazine subscription that may work for some legacy media, but not for a new magazine for a comparatively niche interest of Christian-made fantasy. The costs are just too high to do something like that, and the readership would not support it. So if we do go back to printing, and you can still get some of our back issues that have already been laid out, you can get those at the lorehaven.com. Just click the webzine menu there, and you'll find the link there. I don't, some folks really enjoy getting those print copies, so they just order them directly from the printer. But anybody can read any of the webzine content. It's all in not only the PDFs that we've put together for the magazine. Those are there for those first 9 issues right now. But any of those magazines can be read online. All you need to do to get everything is just get that free email subscription, and then you get the link. You get a little secret password that opens up all the content. And we're more easily able to interact with readers that way. If we sent the magazine anywhere, we don't know what you think about it. No, we don't know what you like, what you don't like, how it blessed you, whether it helped you find the next great book that you really enjoyed. And then there's another advantage to doing more stuff online, Zach, is we can work better to time our reviews with upcoming releases. As we keep doing this, we've been blessed to work not just with independent authors, but some of the more major publishers, like Enclave or Revell or some of those folks. They let us know in advance when their books are coming out. They give us copies, and then we work to try to get those reviews released before the book comes out. It helps our readers to know what's coming, and it certainly helps them by creating a little bit of a buzz if we liked the book. Finally, of course, that fall 2020 issue, it's already in the works. I already have in hand a dozen or more reviews of the best new Christian fantastical novels we found. We're going to have some new articles coming up and more. And you just subscribe free at lorehaven.com, and you will be one of the first folks notified when we have that issue available. Looks like it's going to be in October 2020 when that releases.
Okay, so you talked a little bit about events coming up, like online events on Thursday nights with Realm Makers, but what are the other events you're planning for this year, and even looking way far ahead for 2021? When we're supposedly all supposed to be back to normal, we've all gotten vaccinated, or maybe not, or anyway, we're things will probably be in a much better place next year. So what what do you have planned for Lorehaven? Like as like going to places or being part of things?
I think in 2021, we need to have the superhero get the secret cure into the ventilation system for the planet. He has to crawl through the tunnels and then you suddenly get to the central air supply. And then he just puts it in and suddenly it's all distributed worldwide via the life support system before the doomsday device runs out. And
Right.
otherwise, yeah, it's so hard to plan. You can't. And then even Zach, you mentioned a couple episodes ago that Tenet have released in theaters. It's not doing well, and it's
Oh,
not.
gosh.
It's not its fault. Even if the theaters open up, everyone's schedule has been shot all to pieces. You can't
Yeah.
rely on whatever infrastructure you had before. It's like everyone has suddenly moved to another city and they don't know anyone. You don't know what the school schedule is, or if you do, then your kids are at home. You're the person you used to call to babysit your kids so you could get out to the movie with your spouse. Like that's no longer happening, and someone would have gone to university who now isn't, or vice versa. Like, yeah, everything is just, I mean, it's all been fractured. So how to plan for live events? Well, I personally don't have any scheduled this year, at least the rest of this year. That I did personally, I did a couple of writers conferences this past summer, but they were virtual. I spoke and mentored at two of those. SoCal Christian Writers Conference went virtual at the last minute. I'm really glad they did. I think for a while they were thinking they just have to cancel, but they didn't. I did two workshops there. One was about popular culture, of course, and the other was about discerning fictional magic. And then Zach, we both went to the Realmmakers virtual conference. Realmmakers, great friends and allies on the writing and creative professional side of Christian or faith-based fantasy fiction. I got to moderate the panel about authors and how we react in a Christ-like way to cancel culture, especially when they're trying to cancel authors because of their books. Had some mentor conversations with folks. It was really cool. And I don't think they'll be doing that again next year. I hope not. I missed Realm Makers Live so bad. Yeah. Even though I loved the virtual event, we had a Discord server and everything, and it kind of made us all level up in terms of our internet proficiency. Everybody's willing to innovate a bit and try a new platform. I think even Realm Makers is moving to kind of this new Mighty Networks platform going forward. So there'll be great opportunity for Christian authors to all join together in one space rather than being more scattered. That can only be a good thing.
Yeah, I am at this point where I'm like, I either want to go back to in-person events or I want to level up the digital events and have virtual reality.
Yeah.
Have something just insane, better than just like a Zoom call. But yeah, I realize it may be a while for both of those to happen, but we'll see. Apparently the Oculus 2 is releasing soon. So
my youngest brother did tell me about that, but I don't want to walk around with a little crease on my head all the time any more than I walk around with a mask on my head all the time. This is going to be temporary. And by the way, quick rant, I cannot help but have to call on the command of scripture to love your enemies when I hear people say, oh no, this is the new normal. We're all going to be wearing masks till we die. I think those folks are either doomsayers or just trying to get ahead of the trend so they can say that they predicted it and get the clout. I resent the idea that we're all going to be wearing masks forever and ever. Amen. No, I'll do it now and until the threat is abated, but not till the rest of my life. I'm sorry, would be a prophet. The answer is no.
Oh, see, I look at it like a more positive way. Like we're going to have Boba Fett masks or a Stormtrooper mask or, Mandalorian masks.
That won't work because then along will come some wag and say that it doesn't actually have any health benefits, blah, blah, blah. They're going to take all the fun out of it. Trust me. Yeah, I'm not an anti-mask conspiracy guy, but I want to view temporary safety measures as temporary. And that's part of that is based on my thoughts on popular culture. Like, I don't want to react to the world as if it's always some dangerous force trying to kill you. Any of those sheltering measures have to be seen as temporary until we find some way to resist or become mature against that kind of threat. It's harmful to the human psyche to think that we can just dehumanize ourselves for that long. But anyway, I didn't mean to get off on that, but that may be a future episode as well. And I admit there are definitely some dangerous areas that one can wind up. If you're only worried about your own identity and your own freedoms at the expense of your neighbor's legitimate health needs, then that also is a problem. I do hope we get that magic vaccine. I'm not convinced that we're just going to get it. Like, Zach, if you notice, people started using the direct article. When we get the vaccine, indirect article, you don't even know the thing exists. Did Bigfoot take it?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Well, there's the Russian one, right? And we've seen the meme running around.
Well, yeah.
I decided to participate in this trial for the Russian vaccine, and I don't think I've seen any side effects. And then they post fake Russian.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I mean, it is a weird. We are paying so much more attention to, medical science, the pharmaceutical companies, medical trials than we ever have in our life, and that's kind of the fascinating thing. Like, for me, it's just, I'm a curious person. So I've really enjoyed just reading about how these things work. Of course, it's become politicized. I'm not going to go into that, but it is really interesting to look at how this whole process works. And I guess we'll see what happens in the next few months, but I'm optimistic. I think we've been reading some stories from the Spanish flu. Okay. And, because 100 years ago, pretty much no one that went through that is alive today, or at least that remembers going through that is alive today to tell us about it. I think there's been a couple of stories here and there, but my goodness, we are in an incredibly advanced era compared to other pandemics that have happened. I saw something by Hans Feen, the Lutheran satire guy, and he's like, look, you just look through history and there's always a pandemic, always a tyrant, always unrest, always war, always poverty. It's like this is nothing new. The new thing is that we have so many more resources to deal with this and so many other outlets. They didn't have Zoom 100 years ago. They didn't have, just many of the things that we take for granted now. And to me, that was really calming in a way to say, okay, we can get through this because we have already gotten through this with a lot less. And it is kind of the norm when you look back in history. And so I think things will return to normal, but again, there is a new normal. The thing I always think about, though, Stephen, was that Boston Marathon bombing a number of years ago.
Oh, yes.
Where they that happened, and then they figured out who the suspects were from the surveillance, and then they went on this massive manhunt, and they locked down the entire city. And they said, look, because okay, so the police will do this neighborhood to neighborhood. In fact, this has happened in a neighborhood not too far away from me, where they had a suspect who barricaded himself, with weapons. And they said, okay, if you're the next door neighbor, get out, or if you're this far away, just stay home, like don't leave. And they surrounded the place with just overwhelming force. Well, Boston did that for the entire city because they knew these guys were super dangerous and didn't want anyone in the crossfire. And that lasted, a day or two. And we had some friends living in Boston, some colleagues, and we were just really nervous about what's going to happen. And I remember at the time, everyone thinking, wait a minute, how can the government close down a city, for 2 days? It's just like, if I could get in a time machine and just talk to you people.
Nothing yet. Yeah. Try 2 years. I think some would like that. And by the way, I think in Christian love, I think we ought not be too harsh about the people who say, well, maybe we need to lock down for 2 years. I think some people are, for lack of a better term, sheltered, whether they have the income or the trust fund or their house paid off or a nice job where they can stay from home and get their work done anyway and feel productive and connected with the rest of society. I think that people can say that and not have hostile, tyrannical motives. If I were, for example, a full-time author speaker just doing stuff on the internet, I might be tempted to do that too. Hey, I can just get the groceries delivered. I can have the people with the lesser careers who work at Amazon just bring me my stuff. And I mean, I would be kind of an elitist, yes, but not necessarily hostile, just kind of dumb. So maybe it helps to be kind to people who suggest that we can lock down not just a whole city for 2 days, but a whole country for a couple of years. Like maybe they just need some education. They need to pick up a book, a fantasy book, and realize that they can't stay in their shire the whole time. They have to go out on the road and realize how other people live, and the fact that some of us have to go outside the house. We have to go to factories, or we have to go to the plumbing workshop, or we have to go to an office or something like that. And the kids have to go to school. Some of these folks, I think either they don't have kids or they forgot what it was like. So anyway, maybe if they're staying home the whole time, though, hey, at least we can send them some Lorehaven webzines and get them some good books to read.
Well, here's a reference for you. The Princess Bride and Fazzini with the poisoned wine goblet says. So we know that scene if you've seen it, and the meme goes, clearly I can't choose the back to school option in front of me, and I also can't choose the back to school option in front of you. That's where Naomi and I are right now with some of these options. It just, there's not a good option, and I think you have the right note here, Stephen, that we really have to extend grace. There's a lot of things going on. There's a lot of considerations, not with school, with work, with socializing. And look, I have my own opinions about things, but man, so much of the information has shifted. So much of my own feelings have shifted, and everything, it's always in flux. And I think the best thing we can do is just have grace. I say very little about these issues anymore on social media because it just quickly becomes this argument people have. And I sort of made that mistake recently, but I think the order of the day is grace, because look, no one is in an easy decision-making place.
Right.
All of these decisions are impossible. And so everyone's just doing the best they can. And look, I sympathize with people that are like, I can't wear a mask anymore. And I sympathize with people that are like freaking out when there's around people without masks. Myself, just being vulnerable, I'm high risk. And so I have to play it very, very safe. And it's not just for my sake, but for my family's sake. Like, I don't want something to happen to me and affect them. But at the same time, look, I totally get it. I get why people are like, I just got to, go to a restaurant. I just got to go to a political rally or get on an airplane or whatever, go to the movies. And, because the mind can only take so much of this. And it's funny because I've seen this happen with extroverts and introverts. The extroverts, that's obvious. It's like, I got to be around people. Like, I'm just going crazy all by myself. And the introverts are like, I'm going crazy with these same people around me all the time that are going crazy. And so, looking ahead to where, we're going to go as Lorehaven, man, I can't wait for the meetups, for the conferences, for the get-togethers, and maybe book clubs are going to come back. Who knows? We joke about that book clubs are dead, but maybe that's going to make a comeback. Like, what do you think, listener? Are you going to start a book club? Is this where you're headed? Let us know. But so, Stephen, do you see book clubs coming back?
I would love for book clubs to come back, especially if we're all going to turn into quasi-retired persons sitting around our houses trying to work from home. Then that means we would have the freedom to set our own schedules and be our own boss. And that means, please don't just sit around watching streaming media, especially because some of it is not good for you anyway, if you've been paying attention to any of the latest outrages du jour. So start a book club or join a book club if someone else has started one. Of course, Lorehaven would love to help out with that. Either way, whenever we get on the road again and actually start going to events, I cannot wait just to have a booth in a public place with people coming up, whether they're wearing masks or no masks. And we assume that almost all of us have got the vaccine registered, which may or may not actually happen. But, fingers crossed, and pray to the Lord that it does. Pray to the Lord that our scientists can be wise and fast. But if we can just get a Lorehaven booth like it used to be, but even better, because we're going to have copies of the Pop Culture Parent there, the book, along with the magazines. I see that happening. I also would like to think that in the future, we'd be able to have more resources that would do even more to help readers explore these themes for the glory of God. Anything that is at the intersection of these magical ley lines of biblical truth and fantastical fiction, if you'll excuse the slightly heathen metaphor there, that's where we want to be, not just to sell stuff, even though we may have sounded like that a bit in this episode, but as a service to God's people, to families and churches and anyone else who is called to glorify God in all of our pursuits, including the pursuit of amazing and fantastical fiction.
Okay, well, let's hear from our fantastic fans. So we got a listener email from Elizabeth, and she writes about our recent 2-part series about the pop culture parent. And she says, quote, "My parents were very strict growing up. I couldn't watch cartoons with magic. My Saturday mornings started with chores first. I had to work as fast as possible so I could watch those morning cartoons. That usually meant I missed the magic theme ones like He-Man or Smurfs, so I grew up watching G.I. Joe, Transformers, and Gumby. Honestly, I'm happy with that because I hate fantasy, but I love sci-fi." End quote. Now, Stephen, let me just make a little reference here for if you're a Zoomer listening to this. You've probably heard people say this, but there wasn't always streaming media. A show was on the time it was on, and that was it. And if you didn't tune in at that exact moment, it was gone. You couldn't watch it ever again. And so, yeah, I totally relate to this about having to wake up at a certain time and be ready for it. For me, it was the X-Men. That was the show I loved to watch. And yeah, I loved watching He-Man and Dungeons and Dragons, the cartoon, which that's a whole other topic. Naomi and I have debated this whole question, Stephen. Do we let our kids wake up on Saturdays and watch cartoons, or do we have them do chores first? Because if they do chores second, they kind of drag their feet. But then again, we want to sleep in late. And so I'm fine with them getting up and doing cartoons first. But this is always kind of a balancing act.
Oh, that's what this whole feedback is about. Elizabeth actually writes a longer comment. This is just the first part of it, so we're actually reading it in pieces to add some interaction and hopefully some help as well. I actually didn't grow up watching these 80s cartoons or even the 90s cartoons like X-Men. You switched decades there, I think. They must have been rerunning the He-Man and Smurfs at that point. As I think I've said before, most of the entertainment that I enjoyed growing up was Christian made. A lot of different animated series and musical tapes and such, a lot of VHS. See, I think back in the 80s, VHS tapes were just coming out. So, yeah, you had to watch it on TV or it was gone for, as far as you knew, forever, or at least until they reran it again. So I'm not familiar with these 80s cartoons, except for the fact that I got a hold of a book that my parents had, which is called Turmoil in the Toy Box. I think I've also mentioned that before. And that was a very cautionary book, we'll just say, to be charitable. I don't know the author, and as far as I know, he had the best of intentions in mind, and it was an early example of a Christian attempt to engage popular culture, not just toys, but all the different TV shows that accompanied the toys. In fact, as I remember, the author was kind of surprised and dealing with this phenomenon of having toys connected to TV shows, which is a cultural thing that strikes us now as like, well, duh, of course you get a toy based on a movie or TV.
Merchandising.
Yes, which really did start with Star Wars and the old Kenner action figure line, back in the late 1970s. It used to be a new idea. And so seeing this example as a product of its time of a Christian trying to wrestle with these questions is fascinating. They even had a page in there where they just showed some clip art of like a dolly and a set of blocks and a jack-in-the-box. And then it just had a caption, "Remember when toys were toys?" So even though the book as a whole tried to be a little bit more discerning, that there kind of gave away the game. Like, wait a minute, there's some just tradition-based nostalgia going on here. Wouldn't it be nice if we just got back to the old days when toys were toys and they didn't have battle axes or a magic staff or any of the stuff that He-Man carried around? Anyway, I could go off on that. It's probably another topic for a future episode, but kind of listing my understanding there is, those 80s characters were the first engagement I had with popular culture, even though by the time I read this book, I think it was in the late 90s and I hardly saw any of these critters around very much.
Well, Elizabeth continues by saying, quote, "Now that I'm a parent, I'm strict on what my kids watch, but it's more about language, visuals, and sexual content. I don't want inappropriate images to be burned into their brains. I don't want them to be flooded with bad language that they will end up attempting to use in everyday life. Wouldn't it be interesting to have this discussion with my mother in the past? The idea that the magic from Smurfs really isn't as bad as some of the junk they put into cartoons now." End quote. Oh, man. Yep. Putting on my parent hat of young kids, this is definitely an ongoing discussion. There's a new cartoon my kids have picked up where They picked up on some potty humor, I'll just say, and we're like, oh, that's not great. So let's not repeat that, okay, kids? And then they started. My son started saying this. Well, I'm not going to repeat it, but I thought he was saying one word.
This
and
is
he was
a Christian podcast. You
Yes.
can't repeat it.
I don't have the Babylon Bee filter on my words here.
Flower bed.
Yeah. It turns out it was just another word that my son was mispronouncing. And so I'm like, okay, all right. It's not as bad as I thought it was. It was just, his 4-year-old, linguistic skills, not quite, which I just stumbled over, trying to
his vocabulistic skills aren't like yours and mine.
This is the discussion that Naomi and I have all the time about, what's the balance between keeping content away from our kids that we don't want them to be influenced by or repeat, but at the same time, as we said in our other episode, it's not the pixels that go into your eyeballs or the sound waves that go into your ears that cause you to be sinful. Sin comes from the heart. It comes from within you. Obviously, we're using our own interpretation, okay, where Jesus said it's not what goes in the stomach, but it's what comes out of the heart. But there is the very real sense that, Jesus said, whoever teaches one of these little ones to sin, it's better to put a millstone around your neck and jump into the ocean.
And there are people trying to teach little kids to sin. I mean, even in cartoons, she mentions where it's funny that the Smurf magic, kind of the 80s trope where some fuzzy character living in a forest, reaches into a burlap sack and pulls out something that sparkles. That's how they did magic in the 80s cartoon. Well, now you've got paganism in the form of characters who claim to be either neither male nor female or both at once or one turned into the other. I'm just going there. It's the religion of sexual identity. And that's the heathenism that is very poisonous and that probably is, at least to me, I think, is the chief most threat to Christians and children in particular. However, even that can only go so far as the child has already been trained in the gospel to understand and deconstruct that worldview. A little kid can't do that. And so that calls for some measures that we might, term sheltering, because they're going to imitate what they see because they don't know better. Maybe they're trying to sin or maybe they just think it sounded funny. It depends on the heart of the child. And again, I guess my response here would be, she says, Elizabeth says, I'm strict on what my kids watch. Well, it depends on the ages of the kids. If you have a 4-year-old,
right? Yeah,
you would need to be strict. Just like don't let him around the open bottle of bleach. He doesn't know what it's for. He might try to drink it. Don't leave out the box of matches. But a 12-year-old probably needs to start learning how to use things like matches or the proper application of bleach. And a 10-year-old shouldn't be driving a car, but a 16, 17, 18-year-old needs to learn how to do that. It's the real world, and it's something that is necessary in order to get around and fulfill our function in society. So at some point, and this is what we try to do in the Pop Culture Parent, at some point, the sheltering and what you might call the strictness would need to ease off in some way, just bit by bit, as your kids get older and start asking questions. It's not just the movie rating system that can help, but also just your discernment and working with other Christians, especially ones who've already been there, and wisely using good Christian resources. There needs to be a transition plan from being sheltered to engaging with some of these ideas to eventually, greater independence. Because one of these days, the kid will leave the house, and if they have not been, I won't say exposed, but if they have not been trained to handle these worldviews and to understand them in light of the gospel and to see the false promises that these stories can make, good longings these stories can reflect, but they cannot fulfill their own promises. If you have a character who's both male and female, goes out with girls, goes out with boys, whatever, like that may work for a while according to the bluff that the cartoon makes, but it won't work even in its own universe, and it especially won't work to fulfill that longing in this universe. Love does not equal sex. Love does not equal sex. What a lie. I could lecture about that. Another future episode topic maybe, but only Christ can fulfill the good desire that the story can only gesture toward, and only Christ defines what love means and then answers that longing with the gospel.
Yeah, and there's a whole host of other topics that come up besides just the rating system. One thing Naomi and I talk about is what can our kids handle in terms of tragedy in a
Right.
story,
Yeah, she mentions that
or
here later. Mhm.
yeah, or about horror, or scary elements, or even romance elements. Because hey, there's a whole host of things you got to consider with those kinds of stories. And so, yeah, Elizabeth continues here by saying, "Quote." On the idea of popular culture, my son has had moments of almost anxiety, panic attacks. It relates to the idea of popular culture. He believes in Jesus and salvation. Every day we have a Bible study and read the Word. On Sundays, we've been hosting a Bible study in our home since our church is closed. His worry is about eternity. What will it be like? What about the video games he plays, the electronics he uses? What about the Marvel movies he enjoys? And then he starts thinking that he'll lose all of that. The idea of singing and worshiping forever and doing nothing else in heaven. And he panics. How can I help him? This has been an interesting discussion. Thank you. End quote.
Oh, Zach, we've talked about this several times before, not just in the pop culture parent duology episodes, but especially in our Epic Resurrection series this past spring 2020. We're over long here, maybe, but do go back and listen to those where I think we scratched the surface of trying to answer those questions. And even in the book, we have an appendix with some speculation about what will happen to popular culture in eternity. I guess it would depend. My thought would be, what age is your son? Is he young enough, where he's still, got some, a lot of imagination, reality confusion, and how much would you tell him about what Jesus has promised in the scripture, where he's not just going to take everybody off to some alternate spiritoid place where we float around, but is actually going to renew creation. He's going to transform the universe by fire, judging sin and all sinners, but then renewing his cosmos, his creation forever and ever with himself as king, which includes not just natural wonders on earth, but the good parts of human culture. I would say there's lots of little signs in scripture that human culture in some way will continue. Whether or not the Marvel movies continue or the specific video games or electronics, we cannot answer, but it might help to say, I mean, this is really an answer similar to, hey, what happened to Fluffy? If the dog had to be put down or something, will Fluffy go to heaven? Like, well, that everything good about the pet came from God, because God only ever gives good gifts, even if we think they look bad at the time. He is good. He can be trusted. He's holy. He's perfect. He loves us. According to his definition, which is the only one, God is love. Whatever he shows is by definition love. And if God is that good and he gave that good gift, then we can trust him whether or not the gift comes back. So I guess my personal thought would be, oh yeah, sure. The Avengers are going to be in heaven. Like, personally, I think there's no reason for Avengers movies not to be there, but maybe a small child doesn't quite need to know that. Maybe it needs to be very Jesus focused at that point. And then later on, or depending on the child's maturity level, you could say, because God gave us the idea of making those kinds of stories, even if people who don't know Jesus make those stories, maybe those stories are still pretty good because Jesus is good. And who knows, maybe those stories will be in heaven. Maybe our dog will be in heaven, which is to say new heavens and new earth. We don't know for sure, but we know that we can trust God.
There's a verse that a friend shared with me way back in high school that I think about a lot, Stephen. It's Proverbs 10:22, which says, "The blessing of the Lord makes a person rich, and he adds no sorrow with it." I've also heard it translated as like, he adds no trouble to it. The NIV says no painful toil for it. I also like the CSB. It says, he adds no painful effort to his blessings. So yeah, I think about that a lot with the gift he's given us with pop culture, with imagination, books and movies, video games, everything that we enjoy nowadays with pop culture. It is originally a gift from him, human culture, and God is not going to pull a bait and switch on us. And I don't exactly know what that's going to look like. Okay, in eternity, we all have our speculations, but he's a generous God. He gives good gifts to us. That we know how to give good gifts, and we are not as good and holy as him, and so we can trust that he is giving us goodness through his blessings beyond what we can imagine. And so I just kind of hold on to that. I don't know how this is going to play out in the future, but to you, our listener, what do you think about these questions Elizabeth had? I'm not trying to just not answer them. I think we've given a pretty good answer, but hey, we want to hear from you. How do you navigate these questions? And then what are you reading right now? How are you making it through the pandemic, trying to get away from, screen time or social media or just doom scrolling, which is, my goodness, I can totally relate. If you were a doom scroller, we can talk about that. But how are you engaging your imagination? How are you engaging fantastical stories? What's a great book you're reading? Let us know. podcast@lorehaven.com, or comment about anything else we've talked about. We'd love to feature your feedback on a future episode. podcast@lorehaven.com.
Next on Fantastical Truth, we're going to respond to something that surprised me when I was reading a book that I had not read, a collection of C.S. Lewis short stories and essays, including the very famous ones about why he wrote and how he wrote the Chronicles of Narnia. Some Christians think that good authors must use anything like fairy tales or sci-fi and beyond as mere teaching tools for kids and other readers. We need to make you eat your peas of truth, so we're going to wrap it up in something sweet to make it go down easier. So goes the idea. But others, maybe in response to that tool approach, embrace what they would call creative freedom. And they say that authors like C.S. Lewis, for example, well, they just saw images. They were just using their imaginations. And then once they embraced these images for their own sake, they got the story. And yeah, there's some Christian stuff in there. Aslan is kind of like Jesus, but that just got in there naturally. The best authors just let that get in there naturally and don't try. I actually think I've found that both of those sides are missing something. And technically, I think they're both wrong, especially when they talk about C.S. Lewis, because I read his essay and I realized something when usually happens when reading Lewis that I hadn't seen before. So this means a lot for Christian readers and Christian authors, and we're going to explore that, Lord willing, in our next episode. Meanwhile, try to keep feeding your imagination during the pandemic and rely on good friends and great reviews, including ours, and any other trusted sources to seek the best stories by Christian creators and anyone else alike, while we resist the pandemic panic and seek and find fantastical truth.